They say the mountains of West Virginia are old, older than bones, older than the trees, and much older than the secrets we try to bury beneath them. Most folks look at these hills and see beauty, but for the Miller family, these hills were a ledger, and every generation was a new page of interest on a debt that could never be paid in cash. What you're about to hear isn't a campfire ghost story or a piece of local folklore. This is the deathbed confession of Silas Miller, a man who spent 60 years looking over his shoulder, waiting for the shadows to reclaim what he stole from the earth in 1957. It's a story of a wrong turn, a forgotten cemetery, and a sin-eater's warning that was ignored for far too long. My name is Caleb Miller, and before my grandfather died, he told me that I was the last payment. This is why you should never, under any circumstances, pour anything but cool water on the roots of a black walnut tree. My grandfather, Silas Old Man Miller, wasn't a man of many words. He was a coal miner who had survived collapses and black lung, but as he lay in a hospice bed in 2024, it wasn't the mines that made him shiver. It was the old debt. "Caleb," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves on gravel. "You always thought your grandma's rules were just hillbilly superstitions. Don't pour boiling water on the roots of a black walnut. Never whistle after sundown. Don't step on a sunken patch of dirt. They weren't rules, boy. They were terms of a treaty." Back in the late 1950s, Silas was a traveling salesman, hawking fabrics and tools out of the back of a beat-up Chevy truck. One October evening, a freak storm rolled off the Blue Ridge Mountains, turning the world into a grey wall of fog. He took a wrong turn down a logging road and ended up in a valley the locals called Hollow Creek. He found a small, weathered farmhouse near a rushing stream. An old man on the porch told him he could stay the night in the cellar house across the clearing. Silas, exhausted and freezing, dragged his samples inside. The air in that cellar house was thick with the smell of wet earth and copper. Every time Silas tried to light his kerosene lamp, a cold draft, like a human breath, would puff it out right next to his ear. When the wick finally caught, he saw them. Tall, shadow-thin figures standing in the corners, their eyes glowing like foxfire. A voice, grating like metal on stone, vibrated in his chest. "You've tread on the silent. You've salted the earth. Your blood is the price." Silas didn't sleep. He clutched his Bible until the first light of dawn broke over the ridge. He ran to the main house to thank the old man, but there was no house. There were no people. There was only a crumbling, overgrown pioneer cemetery that had been forgotten by time. He had spent the night sleeping on a sunken grave. Silas fled back to his home in the holler, but the shadows followed him. A week later, his wife, Martha, was out back by the giant black walnut tree. She was pregnant with their first child. Suddenly, she screamed. Silas ran out to find a massive black hound standing on its hind legs like a man. It looked at Silas with human eyes and growled, "The debt is called, Silas. One life for the ones you scolded." Silas realized his mistake. Days before his trip, he had cleared a patch of weeds by that tree by pouring boiling lye water over the roots, unwittingly burning the unseen dwellers of the holler who used that tree as a gateway. He sought out a sin-eater, an old woman deep in the woods who knew the ancient ways. She performed a ritual, burying silver coins and honey at the edges of the property. The shadows stopped watching the windows. The scratching on the roof ceased. Silas thought the debt was settled, but the sin-eater had warned him, the hills never forget a burn. They just wait for the prize to ripen. 20 years later, Silas's youngest daughter, Sarah, the beauty of the county, was celebrating her engagement. She stepped out onto the porch to look at the stars. She never came back. No tracks, no struggle, no body. The only thing they found was a single white lace ribbon from her hair, snagged on a branch of that old black walnut tree. As Silas took his final breath in that hospice room, he gripped my hand so hard his knuckles turned white. "Caleb," he wheezed, "if you ever go back to the old home place, don't you dare clear the brush. Don't you dare pour anything but cool water on that ground. And if you see a shadow that stands taller than a man under that walnut tree, you turn around and you run." After we buried Silas in the family plot, careful to choose high, dry ground far from any trees, I had to return to the old Appalachian homestead to settle his estate. The property had been sitting vacant for years, swallowed by kudzu and the thick, suffocating fog of the West Virginia hollers. I arrived at the cabin just as the sun was dipping behind the jagged peaks. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no owls, just the heavy stillness of a place that felt like it was holding its breath. Dominating the backyard was the black walnut tree. It was massive, its bark gnarled and blackened like scorched bone. Despite it being midsummer, the leaves were a sickly, bruised purple. I remembered Silas's dying words, "Don't pour anything but cool water on that ground." Being a man of science and city living, I tried to brush it off. But as I stepped onto the porch, I saw it. There, pinned to the front door with a rusted iron nail, was a scrap of white lace. It was tattered and yellowed by 60 years of weather, but it hadn't rotted. It was Sarah's ribbon. That night, a storm rolled in, a mountain shaker. The power went out instantly. I retreated to the basement, the sturdiest part of the house, carrying a battery-powered lantern. As the thunder rolled, I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't the wind. It was a rhythmic thumping coming from inside the basement walls. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat made of stone. My lantern flickered. I shook it, but the light dimmed to a dull orange glow. In the corner of the cellar, where the foundation met the raw earth of the hill, the shadows began to detach themselves from the walls. They didn't have faces, just elongated, misty limbs and eyes that burned with a dim, phosphorescent green. The foxfire Silas had warned me about. "The blood is thin," a voice hissed. It sounded like 1,000 insects crawling over dry parchment. The debt was for a life. Silas gave us a daughter, but the daughter had no children. The line ends with you. I realized then that the treaty Silas made wasn't a one-time payment. By scalding their gateway with lye all those years ago, he hadn't just angered them. He had opened a wound in the earth that required a constant poultice of family suffering to keep it closed. I scrambled back, tripping over an old metal bucket. My hand landed in a patch of dirt near the corner of the cellar that felt unnaturally hot, blistering hot. The earth itself was still scalded from 1957. The shadow things drew closer. One of them reached out a hand that looked like a bundle of charred twigs. Just as its cold, soul-sucking grip was about to close around my throat, I remembered the Sin Eater's ritual Silas had mentioned. I didn't have silver coins or honey, but I had my canteen of water. I didn't drink it. I poured it directly onto that blistering patch of earth. The moment the water hit the hot dirt, a thick white steam erupted. The shadows shrieked, a sound like a hawk being torn apart, and recoiled into the stone. The heat in the ground vanished, replaced by a graveyard chill. I didn't wait for morning. I left the cabin, left the furniture, left the land. I sold the property to a timber company the next week for a fraction of its value, with one legal condition written into the deed. The black walnut tree must never be cut, and the ground within 50 feet of its roots must never be disturbed. Sometimes, when I'm in my quiet apartment in the city and a draft hits the back of my neck, I wonder if the water I poured was enough, or if, somewhere back in that dark hollow, the ground is starting to warm up again, waiting for the last of the Miller line to come home. On November 12th, a junior site foreman, eager to clear the backlog, ignored the no disturbance rider attached to the deed of the Miller property. He ordered a heavy-duty stump grinder to remove the black walnut tree to make a path for the logging trucks. The moment the steel teeth touched the bark, the machine didn't just stall, it shattered. Shrapnel from the industrial-grade blades flew backward, embedding itself into the cab. The foreman reported that the sap leaking from the tree wasn't clear or brown. It was thick, dark, and smelled like old copper and stagnant swamp water. The crew attempted to leave for the night, but the logging road, the only way out of the hollow, was found to be completely washed out by a flash flood that occurred despite no recorded rainfall in the county. The men were forced to camp in the old Miller cabin. When the rescue team arrived 2 days later, they found the logging truck idling in the yard. The cabin was empty. There were no signs of a struggle, but the interior was coated in a fine layer of gray ash. On the porch, they found the foreman's hard hat. Tucked inside the brim was a single, fresh white lace ribbon, looking as though it had just been bought from a general store. The black walnut tree remains. The scorch marks where the machinery hit it have healed, but the bark has grown back in a pattern that looks disturbingly like human faces pressed against a veil. The ground around the tree is no longer dirt. It has turned into a shimmering, glass-like substance that stays hot to the touch, even in the snow. Site 42 is to be fenced off with a 10-foot perimeter. All local staff are forbidden from entering the hollow. We have refunded the purchase price to the estate, but the seller, Caleb Miller, has not responded to our legal notices. His last known address is vacant. The survivor was Garrett Vance, a 24-year-old heavy equipment operator who had been on the job for only 3 months. Garrett didn't vanish with the others, because when the burning started in the foreman's throat, Garrett had been sent to the creek to fetch more water. He saw the shadows move across the surface of the stream, not as reflections, but as ink-black shapes swimming under the water. He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs bled, eventually reaching a highway 5 miles away. He moved to a windowless basement apartment in Pittsburgh, thinking 300 miles of concrete and steel would be enough of a buffer. He was wrong. It started with the humidity. No matter how high Garrett cranked the dehumidifier, the walls of his apartment felt slick. By the second week, he noticed a dark stain spreading across the ceiling directly above his bed. It wasn't a water leak. It was a perfect circle of soot, smelling faintly of wood smoke and bitter walnuts. He stopped sleeping in the dark. He bought industrial floodlights and kept them aimed at the corners of the room. He told his therapist he was suffering from PTSD from the logging accident, but he couldn't explain why he had started finding handfuls of dry black soil inside his shoes every morning. A month after the incident, Garrett sat down at a local diner. He ordered a coffee, but as he took a sip, he choked. The liquid wasn't hot, but his throat felt like he had swallowed molten lead. He rushed to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. His tongue was coated in a fine white ash. When he coughed, small pieces of charred walnut shell fell into the sink. That's when he heard it. coming from the drain of the industrial sink. A wet, rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump, thump. A voice sounding like a chorus of dry leaves whispered through the pipes. The water you poured was alone, Garrett, but the Miller line is gone. We need a new well, a new vessel to hold the heat. The following is the last entry found on Garrett Vance's voice notes app, recovered by police 3 days after his neighbors reported a smell of roasting meat coming from his unit. Audio file, 4:12 a.m. They're under the floor, not the apartment floor, deeper. They followed the veins of the earth. I thought concrete would stop them, but they are the earth. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in the holler. I can see Sarah. She's not a ghost. She's part of the tree now. Her skin is bark. She told me it doesn't hurt once the fire takes over your blood. The lights are going, one by one. I can feel the heat coming up through the carpet. It's blistering. They're just the debt, and the interest is due. When the authorities entered, they found the apartment empty. The floodlights were melted into puddles of plastic. In the center of the room, burnt into the hardwood floor, was a scorched silhouette of a man. Inside the silhouette, perfectly preserved and untouched by the heat, lay a single black walnut. Next to it was a note, written in Garrett's handwriting, but in a dialect no one in Pittsburgh could recognize. The gateway is moved. The soil is fed. Do not look for the boy. He has roots now.